I know you're asking today, how long will it take? Somebody's asking, how long will prejudice blind the visions of men? I come to say to you this afternoon, however difficult the moment,
yes, sir,
however frustrating the hour, it will not be long, because truth crushed earth will rise again.
yes, sir.
How long? Not long.
Yes, sir.
Because no lie can live forever.
Yes, sir.
How long? Not long.
How long?
Because you shall reap what you sow.
Yes, sir.
How long? Not long.
How long?
Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne.
Yes, sir.
Yes, that scaffold sways the future.
Yes.
Behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. How long? Not long. Because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice.
Yes, sir.
How long? Not long.
Not long.
Because mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Yes, sir.
He's trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored.
Yes, sir.
He's loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword.
Yes, sir.
His truth is marching on.
Yes, sir.
He has sounded forth the trumpet that shall never call retreat. He is sifting out the hearts of men before his judgment seat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. Strangely enough, I would turn to the Almighty and say, if you allow me to live just a few years in the second half of the 20th century, I will be happy. Now, that's a strange statement to make because the world is all messed up. The nation is sick. Trouble is in the land, confusion all around. That's a strange statement. But I know somehow that only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. And I see God working in this period of the 20th century in a way that men in some strange way are responding. Something is happening in our world. The masses of people are rising up, and wherever they are assembled today, whether they are in Johannesburg, South Africa, Nairobi, Kenya, Accra, Ghana, New York City, Atlanta, Georgia, Jackson, Mississippi, or Memphis, Tennessee, the cry is always the same: we want to be free. And another reason that I'm happy to live in this period is that we have been forced to a point where we are going to have to grapple with the problems that men have been trying to grapple with through history, but the demands didn't force them to do it. Survival demands that we grapple with them. Men for years now have been talking about war and peace, but now no longer can they just talk about it. It is no longer the choice between violence and nonviolence in this world. It's nonviolence or non-existence. That is where we are today. And also in the human rights revolution, if something isn't done and done in a hurry to bring the colored peoples of the world out of their long years of poverty, their long years of hurt and neglect. The whole world is doomed. Now, I'm just happy that God has allowed me to live in this period to see what is unfolding.
You've heard just a description of what is going on now in downtown Chicago. What's your reaction to it? What do you think about a peaceful protest that, quite honestly, has turned violent, has turned into some of the destruction that we see?
Well, I reject the framing. One, I believe violence to be a force against life, human life. And so the language around destruction and vandalism and looting, when we're only talking about buildings and property, is a further continuation of a systematic issue that has people so outraged. So I would name that policing is a system that is here to protect profit and protect property, and that has been at the destruction of black lives for centuries, and it continues on a daily basis. So almost as a journalistic responsibility to be talking about Macy's and State Street and to not be talking about the dozens and dozens of unsolved police murders of the Chicago Police Department, I think is problematic. And so my focus is on people, and even the claim of a protest having to be peaceful is, I think, again, a further issue of depoliticizing people's rightful anger and rightful rage. And as you see all over the world and all over the country, oppressed people, marginalized people are rising up. And the fact that centers of capital and centers that are connected to white supremacy are being targeted, particularly policing and the intersection of business, should be respected.
What is it that protesters want to see as a result of this?
It's not just about George Floyd. It's about essentially rearranging our society. To call protesters violence when policing and violence is how our society is organized is hypocritical and contradictory. And so you should read the signs and listen to what people are saying. They are saying that we need to divest from police systems, and we know that our state formations and those with political power do not move unless institutional capital and that profit centers are affected. And so the fact that this is not an organized effort and folks are organically, from a place of anger, taking similar political action around the country and making similar demands with the same anger that police are oppressive and a violent force in our society, should be taken with a little bit more serious. And so I understand people may be afraid and triggered and scared, and that is rightfully so. But folks should also be naming the violence that the police are doing today. I myself was almost ran over just for drumming on a sidewalk. Folks have been tear gassed, folks have been beaten, and the police have been doing this every year that you can count. It is documented. Y'all have all of the footage and all the reels and all the clippings of all the stories that you've covered every few months. And so I would just encourage folks to be a little bit more politically mature and understand that this is not happening in a vacuum, and be very, very careful with your language right now.
Okay, I will accept that education.
All right, greetings, everybody. My name is Michael Sampson. I'm with the National Desk with the National Alliance Against Racism and Political Repression. I'm also an organizer in Jacksonville with the Jacksonville Community Action Committee. I'm also a member of the Freedom Road Social Organization. So I am so happy that y'all are able to join us on this Sunday evening to celebrate a great man. This program is called The Legacy of Martin Luther King, the George Floyd Rebellion, and the Struggle for Socialism. We are here to reflect on the legacy of Dr. King, but as well as reflect on what we're doing to remember his legacy, but also build the struggle for Black liberation here in this country. We have an esteemed, awesome list of speakers who are active in the movement, have been doing so for decades, some decades, and have been very active in the streets, demanding justice and fighting for liberation. So we have Frank Chapman, we have Aislinn Pulley, and we have Mr. Carlos Montes out there in Los Angeles. So we're going to start with this agenda with our speakers kind of reflecting on the legacy of Dr. King and as well as other words. So our first speaker, I'm going to bring Mr. Frank Chapman. He's with the Central Committee with the Freedom Road Social Organization, as well as is the interim executive director with the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. Frank.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks, comrades. What we share with King, the freedom fighter, is that we too partisans of revolutionary struggles living in revolutionary times. We share with him the concept that the Black liberation movement is a revolutionary movement. And from this perspective, I challenge us to look at three momentous events. One, the great Black-led rebellion of 2020, sparked by the murders of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and several others. This spontaneous uprising of the people engulfed 50 states and engaged over 26 million people. It clearly rocked the boat of systemic white supremacy and set a new stage in the struggle for Black liberation. Two, the historic, unprecedented mobilization of the Black and brown vote to defeat white supremacist Commander-in-Chief Donald Trump. Clearly, the rebellion was a critical catalyst in mobilizing the vote throughout the country. But there was an additional factor in Georgia, and that was Black women led by the brilliant grassroots organizer and freedom fighter Stacey Abrams. And three, the white supremacist attempted coup on January 6, 2021, led by a sitting president. We ended the second decade of the 21st century with the most massive Black-led rebellion against racist repression and national oppression since the Civil War and Black Reconstruction. The white supremacists and their monopoly capitalist backers started the third decade of the 21st century with an attempted coup, which is the spearhead of the most massive white supremacist fascist-led movement since the end of Black Reconstruction and the rise of Jim Crow. In fact, on the very same day that the white racist mob stormed the Capitol, Senator Lindsey Graham stood on the Senate floor and admitted that the attempt to stop Congress from certifying the presidential elections of 2020 harkened back to the overthrow of Reconstruction and the beginning of Jim Crow. He admitted this on the Senate floor, same day. This just says to me that the most reactionary, fascist-minded section of the ruling class is very conscious of what they are doing and that they have the political will to do it. Therefore, if we want to know exactly where we stand in the movement as a revolutionary movement, I suggest that we allow ourselves to be informed by the wisdom of Dr. King himself, and then cull from that wisdom the strategic and tactical lessons necessary for moving us forward. Let's begin with King's description of the Black Rebellion back in 1963. Said he, and I quote, "Never in American history had a group seized the streets, the squares, the sacrosanct business thoroughfares, and the marbled halls of government to protest and proclaim the unendurability of their oppression," unquote. King could have been talking about the May 26, 2020 uprising that started in Minneapolis when he goes on to point out how the Black liberation movement generated quietly over decades and centuries, but like lightning makes no sound until it strikes. And we can say that from Ferguson to New York, to Baltimore, Chicago, right on up to Minneapolis, in May 2020, Black rebellion finally struck like lightning. The revealing flash of its power and the impact of its sincerity and fervor displayed a force of a frightening intensity. These words of King are so applicable today because the storm clouds that have been gathering and darkening during the decades of white backlashes, the years of intensification of racist and political repression enforced by police tyranny and terror and mass incarceration, buttressed by neoliberal austerity, where the government becomes a vehicle for socialism for the rich and poverty for the workers and the oppressed. 2020 showed us that out of these dark and thickening clouds hanging over the horizons of our fears and hopelessness, there will come no gentle rain, but the sound and fury of revolt, of millions taken to the streets, reflecting and demonstrating the dimensions and vastness of the crimes perpetrated against us through state-sanctioned violence, poverty, disproportionate death during a pandemic, and unprecedented social economic suffering. Not winds, but whirlwinds of change swept across the nation in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. Abolitionists, defund the police, and community control of the police, slogans of our movement, became war cries of the masses. As the tides in the streets seemed to subside, another tide of Black and brown people registering to vote in the urban centers of North, South, East, and West rose. The protests that took hold of the masses in the summer translated into electoral protests in the fall. Momentous events in the streets morphed into an unprecedented number showing up and turning out to vote. In those very areas where the forces of reaction and white supremacy hit the hardest, like Georgia, Detroit, Philadelphia, Arizona, Black and brown voters emerged triumphantly. There's been a lot of popcorn analysis comparing the events of January 6th, when white supremacists stormed the Capitol, with the launching of the Civil War in 1861. This is because the Civil War was also clearly a fight for liberty to enslave our people. And like the white supremacists then, Trump and his crew were hell-bent on ignoring every barrier prohibiting them from overturning the elections. Since the overthrow of Reconstruction, that is the ending by violence and terror, the revolutionary gains of the the Civil War, there's a whole other history of alliances and compromises between the old former slaveholding South and the high-finance Northern capitalists to continue the oppression and super exploitation of Black people. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution abolishing slavery, granting citizenship as a birthright, equal protection of rights, and the right to vote were kept on paper, but not fully enforced, not even to this day. The white supremacists' attempted coup, January 6th, had the explicit aim of overturning the presidential election of November 3rd, 2020, by disenfranchising millions of Black and brown voters. It is not enough that the ultra-right has already reversed affirmative action and gutted the Voting Rights Act of 1965. They want the total use of government to enforce their extreme racist agenda. They want undisputed power to continue police tyranny in our communities, to perpetrate mass incarceration as the new Jim Crow, to plunder the national treasury, tax cuts for the rich, budget cuts for the poor, and so on. When the masses rise up and fight back, not only with protests in the streets, but in the electoral arena at the ballot box, white supremacist thugs are unleashed by their commander-in-chief against the very government that up till now has been loyal to them and given their leader, Trump, unprecedented executive power. This is not 1861. And I'm gonna come to the end of this before 2022. This is 2021. But we live in the shadow of the unfinished revolution started by the last Civil War. To go forward, we must muster the masses to get Trump and his racist regime and Nazi stormtroopers out. We must do so while at the same time firmly and unequivocally putting forth an agenda for Black and brown liberation and a class struggle agenda for hundreds of thousands, even millions of workers who are dying and suffering from this COVID-19 health crisis and agenda and economic devastation. And it is incumbent on us to demand that Congress end this white supremacist revolt by fully restoring the Voting Rights Act, expanding the Civil Rights Act to mandate that Black and brown people have the right to determine who polices their communities and how their communities are policed, and to defund the police and demilitarize the police, to end mass incarceration and grant reparations for the slavery and genocide perpetrated against our people. We don't just want Trump and his cohorts held accountable, we want Black liberation. End racist tyranny with Black and brown liberation. And we must recommit ourselves to building a Marxist-Leninist party to guarantee a socialist future for our class, our people, and all humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Really powerful words. The next speaker, we're going to bring up Aislinn Pulley from Black Lives Matter Chicago to speak on some of the things that Frank was just speaking on. Aislinn?
Thank you. Also want to honor that today is the 60th anniversary of the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, who led the anti-colonial liberation fight in the Congo, and was assassinated by the United States government via the CIA. And it feels fitting to acknowledge him today, and specifically acknowledging the link between this government and his assassination, along with the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This King Day feels more than any other in my recent memory, feels like it is distinctly highlighting the contradictions between the United States mythology and the reality of life in this country. Over the past 10 months of this pandemic, the United States has expedited the creation of the world's first trillionaire via Jeff Bezos. At the same time as this is on record to be accomplished within the next few years, the United States added a couple hundred more billionaires. And it has increased billionaire presence by 12% over 2019 and by 14% over 2018. Billionaires in the United States, which number around 800, so that's 800 people who have amassed this enormous wealth, now control $3.4 trillion in total assets, which is 14% more than they did at the end of 2018. At the same time as this historic rise in profits for these 800 people, these 800 individuals in this country, over 60 million working people in the United States have been forced into unemployment. As economist Richard Wolff explained, you have to go back to ancient Egypt to see similar levels of inequality in another society. So this is underscoring this enormous wealth growth that has happened for these 800 individuals at the direct pain and oppression and disenfranchisement and super exploitation of over 60 million people in this country. Underscoring this crisis is the reality that life expectancy for the first time in at least 4 decades in this country is now decreasing. And that's directly a response to COVID and directly a response to the governmental abandonment in the response to COVID. The United States already has the lowest life expectancy of all other wealthy countries in the world, and now that is even lower. And for Black folks, that means that we are even harder hit. In Chicago, the majority of deaths as a result of COVID have been from Black folks. In March of 2020, 80% of COVID deaths were Black. And this is a logical consequence to the medical apartheid that is a reality in this city, where on the South and the West sides, we have not just hospital and clinic deserts, we also have pharmacy deserts, or apartheid, which is a more accurate term to reflect the intentional political distribution of unequal access of resources. Further making it harder to live, unemployment for Black folks in Chicago has almost tripled over the course of the past 12 months. And at the end of 2019, unemployment for Black people in Chicago was at 5%. At the end of 2020, it is now 14%, nearing 15, almost triple. The majority of the jobs that were lost were service industry jobs. So what that means is that it's the poorest of the poor who have now been forced into even deeper segments of poverty and desperation. On top of this grim economic reality is the other pandemic, the other crisis that Black people have been living with since the dawn of the United States as a country, which is the pandemic of white supremacist violence and racism. Nationally, CNN just reported that Black children are 6 times more likely than white children to be killed by police. In Chicago, that number is higher, it's 10%. Black people are 10% more likely to be killed by police than white people. This is one important, but only one example of the super exploitation that Black people face in this country. Within this context, we can situate what Frank was talking about, which was over this summer, over 26 million people took to the streets in outrage of all of these conditions that I just named. And what that means is that in this country, over 550 cities, towns, villages, suburbs rose up in resistance against these conditions, including some of what we consider as the most disconnected areas of the country, like the Amish, actually participated in resistance and rising up. Protests were sustained for over 2 months across this country, signaling an important development, which is that the ideological hegemony that ruled over the past 40 years with the rise of mass incarceration has now been fundamentally fractured. And it's within this context that we see the rise of the fascist right, of the white supremacist armed militarized right wing. It's in part response to this advancement in the movement that we have been able to shatter the mythology of the American dream and the mythos of American exceptionalism by revealing the truths, which is that at its core, the United States is a violent country. At its core, the United States is an unequal, repressive, and oppressive country that utilizes its police force to enact torture, terror, brutality, and murder on the population so that we don't change the conditions of having a tiny, minuscule minority of people, of 800 people, amassing enormous wealth at the expense of 60 million people being unemployed. And so we can view the increase in the right wing, the increase in these fascist forces led by Trump as a response to this change, as a response to this movement. And so in that vein, we honor King today, we honor King tomorrow, and we continue this fight. As King said, the United States is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, and that remains true. That remains true abroad, and that remains true internally. And Black people are witness, we have been witness to this reality for over 400 years. And so we are at a turning point in this country to permanently make real the changes that must come to order in order for Black folks, which then in turn means all folks can live fully dignified lives. And so while the polarization has increased, it has increased as a response to the wins that we as a movement have been able to maintain and fight. And that means we are just beginning, because we have to topple them, we have to defeat the fascists in order to redistribute the resources that they are violently withholding from us. So we are beginning. It may be scary to see what they are doing, but we are beginning. And we will take the legacy of King forward by marching on, by marching in the face of these people who want to hoard wealth at the expense of our lives, and we will defeat them and we will win.
Thank you, Aislinn. I know this isn't a religious program, but we're definitely having church here this evening, knocking it out the park. Amazing words, amazing words. So I'm gonna toss it out to the West Coast in Los Angeles. Mr. Carlos Montes, co-founder of the Brown Berets, also with Centro CSO. He's gonna give us some reflections.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's an honor to be on this program with such eloquent and esteemed speakers. Wow, this is awesome. No, I just want to share some of my thoughts on the legacy of Martin Luther King. As a young Mexican boy coming from Mexico, you know, growing up in the States, facing racism and becoming a Chicano, right? I'll mention one thing, that there's always a picture in the Chicano homes, for working class homes, of Emiliano Zapata, Kennedy, usually, and Martin Luther King, you know, in every kitchen, you know. It's kind of interesting because obviously Zapata was a revolutionary leader in Mexico, led armed struggle. Then Kennedy, of course, was the president. But King has always been an inspiration to the Chicano community, the Central American community. I'll say the Mexican American community, but I prefer to use the word Chicano. As a young man growing up in South LA, East LA, myself and the Chicano movement were inspired by the Black liberation movement, the civil rights movement. Not only Martin Luther King, but you know, the Black Panther Party, NAACP, us, the Black Student Union, as well as the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, right? You know, growing up in the poor barrios of Southern California, we became angry young men, and we joined the movement, the Chicano movement for Chicano liberation. We're inspired by the cry of say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud, you know, Black power. So we raised the issue of brown pride and Chicano power. And initially, as young men, we saw the enemy as being the white man, the honky, right? But due to the influence of Martin Luther King and his invitation to join the Poor People's Campaign in 1968, he invited, it was Martin Luther King who led FCLC and saying we got to invite everyone to the Poor People's Campaign, including them Chicanos that are militant, that don't believe in nonviolence. He invited the Brown Berets. He invited the Crusade for Justice. He invited the Alianza Federal de Mercedes. And these are all militant Chicano organizations, even though he got some pushback from Reverend Abernathy, some of the other reverends, you know, that, oh, these Mexicans are not for nonviolence, right? But he opened the invitation for us to join the Poor People's Campaign in 1968, after we were involved in the massive East LA Chicano student walkouts in March of 1968, and then he was assassinated, right? So we felt very important that we joined the Poor People's Campaign, and we were there as young, angry, young men and women who thought the white man was the enemy, right? But due to the example of the Poor People's Campaign and Martin Luther King's movement, we were there with poor people from all over the U.S., Native Americans from Arizona, white Appalachians, whites from Appalachia, from the South, blacks, Puerto Ricans. And we started to realize that the white man was not the enemy, but that the system. We were part of the original Rainbow Coalition. We saw this, we started to see that we were part of a poor people's movement for justice and equality, racial equality, as well as economic equality. And that the real enemy or the problem was the elite, the 1%. And both of you speakers have eloquently pointed out, you know, the problems of this society, the super rich, right? So the legacy for us in the Chicano community of Martin Luther King is that he opened up the doors to us to be part of a mass movement for social justice and economic justice. That it wasn't just about blacks or whites, it included Mexicans or Chicanos. And it helped us to politicize our movement, to realize that we needed to unite and build on what we call Black and Brown unity. And Black and Brown unity has always been a fundamental part of the Chicano movement, whether it's with the SCLC, the Black Panther Party. And that's why recently we joined the founding of the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression in Chicago, you all out there. And, you know, here in LA, we're a strong ally and work closely with Black Lives Matter LA. So that's the legacy of Martin Luther King to us, that it wasn't just, you know, certain people fighting for struggle. They were all part of the Rainbow Coalition, a multiracial, working class, militant movement for social justice. And that we needed to be part of that movement as Chicanos. So I'll just wrap it up there. I don't, you know, you were, the last two speakers were so eloquent. I'll just say a few words that, you know, I mean, we're of course, you know, glad that Trump is gone. Hopefully, finally. I mean, he's the one that put out that executive order, Blue Lives Matter, supporting police. And here in Southern California, we've had over 628 young Black men and women and Chicano men and women killed by the police. And that's why we united with Black Lives Matter LA to fight against police killings. And maybe I'll talk a little bit more about that, some of the successes we've had here in LA. But, you know, Martin Luther King gave us his life and inspired us to continue the struggle. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Awesome words as well. I know all our speakers have done a really great job kind of explaining the past year, what we saw, as well as kind of the legacy of King and what he fought for. So I have a couple questions I would like to ask our panelists and our speakers. I know in 2020, we saw a deepening of a rebellion and an uprising that we hadn't seen before. I think Frank and Aislinn pointed it out, as well as others. One question as always, I've always thought about was, how does the upsurge and the rebellion that we saw last year and that we'll continue to seeing, I mean, how does that compare to the previous years? And I guess the struggle that King himself was a part of in those rebellions and those protests and those marches. Maybe Frank, And then Carlos, I don't, I wasn't, I wasn't around back then, and I don't think Aislinn was either. So maybe y'all two would be the best to answer that question. So let's start with
Yeah, well, thanks for respecting my age. Yeah, I was definitely here. Well, I was telling Nathan not too long ago, and also some other younger comrades of mine, that there are comparisons, and then there are no comparisons. The comparisons speaks to the continuity of the Black liberation movement, because ever since the overthrow of Reconstruction, the Black liberation movement in this country has been about finishing what we call the unfinished revolution. That Dr. W.B. Du Bois talks about in Black Reconstruction. Because we were never given our fundamental rights under this bourgeois democracy, and so. But we've always been a revolutionary movement because we've always been about overthrowing our oppressors, But not since this country was founded as a republic has there been a rebellion led by Black people of the dimensions and vastness of what happened last year, May of last year. That's a fact, Aislinn pointed out some of the figures in her presentation. I casually referred to it in mine. 26 million people. Actually, it was probably more than 26 million. 26 million people in over 50 states, but also the world. Because name me a capital in the world that didn't rock in between May and August of last year. I mean, people were rebelling all over the place, particularly in England and in Germany and in France, and some of the European countries, because Europe is no longer just the white people's territory anymore. A lot of the colonials are now living in those areas, have migrated to those areas. And a lot of them are experiencing discrimination and racism and so forth. I could give a whole lot of different reasons, but for a lot of different reasons, this was a much more massive protest and what have you. Depending on how you look at it, a more revolutionary one. I think that's attested to by the fact that you had an attempted right-wing coup, because fascism always comes as the counter-revolution before the revolution. That's what fascism is, And these people see us coming. And so, as Aislinn pointed out, they are trying to block that, But I don't think it can be blocked. I really don't. This is not only the most massive protest in our history, it's also the most irreversible, because in the past, these white backlashes and stuff have worked. But this protest was so great, I don't think it can. I just want to mention one thing that I say to people all the time. Do you realize how long it took the civil rights movement to become a nationally recognized movement? It started in 1954 with the Montgomery bus boycott, 54, 55, and also the murder of Emmett Till in 55. In 1964, the biggest demonstration nationally that the civil rights movement had was about 250,000 people, well, maybe a little bit more than 250,000 people in Washington, D.C., but not even 1 million people. So we're talking about a rebellion that spontaneously erupted that involved over 26 million people. And that was in a matter of days, not years. So there was a big difference. huge. It involved over 26 million. Nothing like this ever happened before. And that was in a matter of days, not years. So there was a big difference. Huge. It involved over 26 million. Nothing like this ever happened before. And that was in a matter of days. I'm hearing my voice coming back at me. What's going on?
Yeah, I think it's stopped. You want me to go on now, Michael?
Yes. Yeah. Tell us about kind of your comparison, I guess.
Yeah.
The
the rebellion. Yeah, the uprising, the rebellion of 2020 was awesome. I think it was much more well organized, multiracial. We had young Chicanos, young whites, black, Asians. I remember the 65 Watts rebellion. I was a high school student doing a janitor, working with black janitors at a school. You know, we'd argue about it. Some of the black would say, we got to go out there and do our thing. The other guy would be saying, no, we can't. And I remember the 92 rebellion, Rodney King verdict. We were out in the streets protesting at the LAPD station where the masses of Latino and black folks were just rebelling, but it was spontaneous. Over 30 people were killed, primarily by police. Angry, you know, we were all angry, but it was disorganized. You know, the targets we picked were the Civic Center downtown, the financial district. It was pretty well disorganized, the 92 rebellion. So I have photos of that too. I should put them out. But this 2020 rebellion, in my view, and I agree with what Frank said, much more massive, national, international, multiracial, better organized. Day after day, there were protests almost every day in LA. You know, it's hard to keep up with everything. My body, I'm 72 years old. I said, damn, let me take one break, right? Then take a break from one day, then go out to the next one. The other thing is that families are out there. Chicano working class families, moms and kids and daughters are out there protesting and getting shot, getting tear gas, but coming back a day or two later to continue the protest in solidarity with the families who have black families that have lost their sons, right? And I think there was a high degree of political consciousness that we're up against not only Trump, but what Trump represents, white supremacist racist system. And I think people realize that, you know, we're fighting against police killings, against racism, but for systemic change. So, you know, this is definitely a new era in the uprising, better organized. And I agree with Frank, it's not going away. We got to continue it into 2021. And you know, support we got from worldwide, you know, the solidarity from international revolutionary movements throughout the world, I think is also important, that we need to support them as they support us. And I just remember that in the Poor People's Campaign, we would have a protest every day. Reverend Jackson one time led us to the house. I think, you know, we walked into the cafeteria, into the health, education, welfare. We all ordered food, refused to pay, did a sit-in. Then the next day we marched on the Supreme Court, supporting native rights to water and the fishing rights. And then one time we marched on the White House. We all got arrested. I remember those days. Every day we'd have a different protest. In the Poor People's Campaign, we all got busted together. But it was, you know, centered in Washington, D.C. But the uprising of 2020 is, you know, awesome revolutionary movement that we have to build on that and fight, you know, and you're right, fight for socialism, fight for equality. And I'll just stop there.
Awesome words. So I know we're talking about what we're trying to fight for. I think, you know, we've, you know, fully talked about the problem at hand and what we saw kind of last year, this uprising and this continued uprising. So one of the questions I had was, you know, one of the big things that we put forth through the National Alliance is fighting for community control of the police. So maybe it's a question I have for Aislinn. Why is the struggle for community control of the police so paramount in the struggle for Black liberation? And are there like other plans that BLM Chicago are putting into action to really kind of carry on the legacy of Martin Luther King?
Yeah, so that demand began in the 60s, and we certainly are carrying the banner that the fighters and the revolutionaries before us put forward. And in Chicago, it becomes the reality of policing is one that is extraordinarily murderous, torturous, and violent. And so in order for us to be able to live, we need the police to stop. And the call for community control is recognizing the fact that the police function as an armed component of the state, and the state will not call for the control of the police because the police are carrying out the dictates of the ruling class. And so the only folks who are able to rein in the police are us. No one else is going to do that. And so therefore, that means it is up to us to make those demands, and it will only be us who will get the police knees off of our neck. We are the only ones who will be able to demilitarize the police, as Frank said. It's not going to come through the puppeteers of the ruling class, through their politicians, or any other agency. It's going to come through the mass demands of the people. And so CPAC, which is what we have in Chicago, which is an ordinance for community control of the police, which stands for, and Frank is wearing the shirt, which is an all-elected civilian police accountability council, has been supported by over 90,000 Chicagoans through over 5 years of organizing in the city, talking to people on the streets, in the neighborhoods, and asking the question, what do you think should be, what would you do if you were able to hold police accountable? And we know what those answers are, and we've done surveys. The answer is that we would defund them. The answer is that we would de-weaponize them. We would make it so that justice would be achievable, which is the ending of police killings. That's true justice. It's the ending of police torture. It's the ending of policing. And no one else is capable of doing that but us. So we don't look to the politicians, we don't look to the ruling class to resolve the crisis of policing, because it's in their interest to maintain it. We look to ourselves.
Thank you, Aislinn. Frank, did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
No, she wrapped it up.
All right, perfect. And I know, the fight for community control of the police, I mean, that's a struggle that has expanded all across the country. We're seeing cities like Washington, D.C., the DMV, Jacksonville, Tallahassee, Tampa. We see it in Salt Lake City, Dallas, Minneapolis, the Twin Cities, Milwaukee. Like it's exploding everywhere. I think that's a very beautiful thing. I think it's a continued, like Frank brought up, Dr. King, one of his paramount fights was fighting for the democratic right of oppressed peoples to have their basic democratic rights, such as the democratic right to vote. Something that Frank always says, part of the democratic right of oppressed people is to control who polices their neighborhoods and how they are policed. It's a struggle that we fought ever since the days of radical reconstruction, and we're still fighting now. So I think that's excellent. I know You talked about, and then this is a question for Carlos. I know you spoke earlier about some of the struggles that y'all have been put forth in Los Angeles in regards to, you kicked out the district attorney who was pro-cop, never
Yes.
killed cops. You want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Led and organized by Black Lives Matter LA. 3 years ago, there was a campaign to demand prosecute killer cops. Here in LA, we got the largest sheriff's department in the county. I think in the U.S. LA, we have Sheriff Villanueva right now, LA County Sheriff. Then we got the LAPD. I think you all heard about LAPD, right? Daryl Gates era. They continue to kill young Black men and women and Chicanos, right? And Jackie Lacey, being African American, 8 years ago, she got in under being a liberal. I'm going to make things better, but she's pro-police, pro-death penalty, pro-incarceration. She refused to meet with BLM LA and the other Chicano community organizations, right? And so BLM LA decided, you know what, we got to take her out. And BLM LA with Centro CSO, White People for Black Lives Matter, many community youth organizations organized a weekly rally protest outside what we call the Hall of Injustice, outside her office, every week on Wednesday afternoon, consistently demanding Jackie Lacey must go. And then during her re-election campaign, we would go to her fundraisers and almost get arrested at her fancy restaurant fundraisers with primarily upper class folks and pro-police folks. And then finally, a candidate by the name of George Gascon decided to run, and I don't want to go into a lot of his background, but he challenged her. Yeah, he came in as a reform candidate, right? And what happened is BLM LA organized a full massive campaign along with protesting, rallies, pickets, all the time, right? As an emphasis of organizing the community and organized mass protest campaign, organized the Get Out the Vote campaign, which included billboards all over the city with the pictures of young Black and men and women who had been killed by the sheriffs, LAPD, and young Chicanos killed, right? And a full phone banking Get Out the Vote campaign. In East LA with BLM LA, we organized a big rally and Get Out the Vote, and basically having the voter registration with the name going door to door and getting out the vote. This was a full campaign. And some people still thought it was going to be hard to get an incumbent out, right? Jackie Lacey got millions of dollars from the Police Protective League, the Deputy DA Association, all the pro-police folks put in money, millions of dollars into her campaign. George Gascon had been a former LAPD officer, training officer, and he was a chief of police in Arizona. And he was a DA in San Francisco. So his program was about reform, not incarceration, no to the death penalty, no to cash bail, and to prosecute killer cops, right? So I mean, it was a hard-fought campaign, but we knocked her out. She was defeated, and it was a victory for the people. So now we're implementing the reforms. Like I said earlier, I don't know if I said that the Deputy DA Association is suing the new DA to try to stop the reforms. The Police Protective League is doing a massive social media campaign attacking, bringing up the issue about poor victims. What about the victims, right? And threatening the recall. We support, and it's funny for me to support a DA because I've always been against DAs. I've been arrested so many times. I'm anti-DA, right? But this guy, like I said, he's against the death penalty. He's against having enhancements, gang enhancement, gun enhancement. This is where you get more years in jail when you're supposedly in a gang. But he's also already opened up 4 new cases for police killings to investigate them and to get the evidence to prosecute these cops. He's opened up a advisory committee to recommend which cases to reopen. So this is the battle. If you continue in battle, the police, the racist pro-police people don't stop, And by the way, the vote, it was a full Democratic open vote. So, this is the battle. If you continue in battle, the police. Almost got a little echo right there, recording back. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. And I think it's awesome. I mean, the struggle that y'all have taken part in, and I think that's awesome stuff to hear. Especially when you hear about the struggles that folks in Chicago have been a part of and have led, and as well as other cities. I think it's awesome that it seems like nationwide we have a lot of organizations really hitting the streets and fighting the fight. So one of the questions I had was, as we may know, Dr. King's last protest was, striking with the Memphis sanitation workers. They were Black workers, one of the worst professions, no safety standards. There's actually a great documentary called At the River I Stand that I would implore everyone watching this to watch. It talks about a lot, but that was one of his last public struggles. He showed solidarity with the Memphis sanitation strikers. So the question I had is, as an organization with Freedom Road, our key strategy is we believe in a strategic alliance between the multinational working class and the oppressed nations. That's how we can fight for socialism and actually do that. So, in essence, Dr. King himself, he was trying to unite the Black liberation movement with the workers movement in Memphis. So how have we done that? I know in Chicago, y'all have been a part of awesome struggles with the unions there and with labor. So can you kind of tell us a little bit about that, Frank, about how y'all have been able to kind of forge this alliance of sorts?
Absolutely. Well, first, let me just, kind of going into that as by way of intro. Let me just say that the alliance between the progressive labor movement and class conscious workers with Black liberation is a necessary one, absolutely necessary one. In fact, I just finished writing a book called Marxist-Leninist Perspectives on Black Liberation and Socialism, where we put that in a historical context so that people can see that ever since modern scientific socialism emerged in 1848, that it has been in alliance with the Black liberation movement in the United States. And that alliance continues to this day through Freedom Road. Having said that, nothing works unless you work it in practice, So the alliance in Chicago, and also we work with Black Lives Matter in this regard too. We have an active relationship with the labor movement, with the most advanced and the most militant sections of the labor movement. We have an active relationship with the teachers union, have had for a number of years, for almost 20 years. And we have an active relationship with the Service Employees International Union, Local 73. We've had that for a number of years. We have a relationship with the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, and we hope to make that more active than what it's been. But right now, the most dynamic and active relationship that we have is with SEIU Local 73 and the Teachers Union, and also SEIU Local 1 and SEIU HCII, Healthcare Workers for Illinois and Indiana. And you know, we have worked with them in the trenches. Just recently, SEIU went out on a strike, and that was a very important strike because it had to do with this pandemic, COVID-19. You know, workers working under unsafe and hazardous conditions, workers getting infected with the virus and dying. You know, and so this was a very important struggle because it not only involved the workers at the University of Illinois Health Center. It involved workers everywhere. You know, they represented workers who could not represent themselves, and they worked with the alliance, and we worked with them. You know, we put people on the picket line. You know, Eastland came out to the picket line. You know, other people came out to the picket line. We actively engaged with them in the struggle, and we won that struggle. We got a contract. You know, and that's very important. Same thing is true with the teachers union. When they had their strike, we worked with them. We won the picket lines every day. You know, and they won that struggle. You know, so this is very, very important. And also what's important is that a lot of the families that we work with, whose sons and daughters have been tortured and falsely imprisoned, wrongfully convicted by the police, are members of unions. Now we defend them whether they're a member of a union or not. You know, that's not a qualification. But the important connection there is very important. 90% of the Black community is working class, you know, and Black people form the largest percentage of unions. I mean, proportionally speaking, Black people are in unions, you know. Black working people are very well represented in a lot of different unions, particularly the unions in the service industry. You know, healthcare workers unions, you know, postal services, transportation, you know, public transportation, and so forth and so on. So it's not by accident that a high percentage of people who are wrongfully convicted and murdered by the police are members of union families. You know, so that's a very natural and necessary alliance. You know, and the only way that we can beat this system, the only way that we can really carve out a path to Black liberation and socialism is through this kind of united alliance between labor and the Black community and other oppressed communities, Chicano community, indigenous communities, and so on.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Frank. I think that's awesome, the work that y'all have been doing.
Can I say something real quick on that?
Yeah, sure, Carlos.
Yeah, the restaurant of Hotel Employees Union did a protest to protest the killing of Andres Guardado, a young Central American man, because his father is a restaurant worker. So that was pretty good solidarity, right? But also, United Teachers of LA passed a resolution condemning the death of Jesse Romero in Ball Heights, a young 14-year-old Chicano who was killed. He was a student at local schools, right? So yeah, Frank, you did awesome of pointing out that union solidarity. We do have a big problem that the LA County Federation of Labor, which is one of the largest membership in the United States, does have the sheriff's so-called union. We don't consider it a union, right? It's called Association of LA Sheriff Deputies. And, you know, we're going to try to get them out. We don't see them as a union. The unions are very important. Thank you.
Sure, for sure. No, I know that's something of folks that we work with here in Jacksonville, they are, rank and file teachers as well as rank and file teamsters. So that's awesome. There is that strategic alliance that needs to be had, and that's a key strategy that we hold as an organization. But we have to have practically in our movements to really build that united front to overthrow the rule of the 1%. I know, Aislinn, you brought it up earlier about Patrice Lumumba's assassination by the CIA. And one of the things that drew the most fire from the imperialist machine towards the king was his speech on the war in Vietnam, standing against that, the three evils, one of them being militarism and him calling that out. So could you tell me, your opinion of why is it important for like socialists and communists here in the United States to take a stand, I guess, for oppressed nations all across the globe?
Well, other than the very famous Workers of the World Unite, we have nothing to lose but our chains, which is where Asada got from. Ultimately, that's the reason, right? Is that the ruling classes work in concert globally. And in the United States, which is now starting to wane as a superpower and is in deep crisis, exists as a superpower because it is able to subjugate and exploit the third world majority. And so the extraction of all of the resources from the continent of Africa and throughout Asia and Latin America means that the people of all of those places are also our brothers, sisters, siblings, family. Because just as much as we are we are under occupation here as an oppressed nation, and the police enact their torture techniques that they wage against people abroad here on our people. It is incumbent upon us to make that ideological connection and understand that they are doing it for similar reasons. So they're doing it because it is necessary to oppress us into subjugation in order for them to have the control to amass the resources to hoard the wealth that they do. So that's why both King and Malcolm X were assassinated, because they were able to make those ideological connections with the United States as not just an oppressor internally and domestically of Black people, but as an oppressor internationally. And King being able to identify that the United States is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, which he did at his speech condemning the Vietnam War, is what sealed his fate as being public enemy of US empire. And Malcolm X working with nations across the world and African nations lifting up the liberation movements that were happening is part of why he was also assassinated by the United States government. Because it's when we are able to identify the common oppressor as the common oppressor is when they are threatened.
That's an excellent answer. 100%. That's spot on. So I guess the last question I have, and it's a question I want everyone to chime in on, and we've already talked about it a little, but can we explain the need for building a broad united front against police crimes and police terror? I think we've talked about that, but maybe kind of finish it up with this inclusive front. Why is it necessary to maintain it and build a broader movement? So maybe let's start with Frank.
Yeah, Well, yeah, that's a good point to end on. You know, the George Floyd
Finish it up.
Breonna
The
Taylor
front.
rebellion this past summer and fall, which is still going on, by the way. It established, I think, once and for all, that the reality is in our favor. We can organize a broad and deep united front against police tyranny and terror. That's exactly what happened during the rebellion. Here in Chicago, in white sections of the city, where we had very little traction prior to the George Floyd rebellion. In those areas now, we have great traction. Progressive whites in those areas, and some people who you wouldn't really consider progressive, but just or elude political description. They were involved. I went to street protests in all white sections of this city, where thousands of people were gathered up in the streets and asking me to come and speak about community control of the police. I went to parks where several hundred people in the same kind of communities, in wards that have historically been hostile to our demands, So this thing revealed to me depths that I didn't even know about, Like I had no idea that these people were going to come our way anytime soon, But during that rebellion, they did. So I think that rebellion was a big wake-up call to a lot of people in this country, and it shook a lot of things loose. I think it shook this country to its foundations, and it's still trembling. It's still trembling, That's why you see this fascist shit going on in Washington, D.C. It's still trembling, And so that's one thing. That's one point I want to make. The other point I want to make is that when fascism becomes an organized movement and starts vying for power, that's what we got going on in the United States right now as we speak. It starts vying for power. They come to power in all different kinds of ways, but the ruling class historically has handed power over to them, handed power over to them. Even when there were violent attempts by them to overthrow governments like they did in Spain in the 30s, still the ruling class handed power over to them because, the people had to defend the democracy in Spain. No country in the Western world put military folks in there to defend democracy. The people had to do that. They do that like through the Abraham Lincoln brigades and so forth and so on. Right now, the greatest danger that this country is in is that a lot of people don't see that it's the people who have to defend democracy right now. The Democrats can't do it. They just can't do it. They don't have the ability to do it. They don't have the political will to do it. So it's the people that's got to do this. And so now we have the possibility, we have the necessity, we have the challenge in front of us to build the broadest, deepest possible united front movement to defeat this fascist movement that's already here. I think it's suicidal and unrealistic to talk about it's coming. It ain't fucking coming. It's already here. It's here. It's right here. You saw what happened on January 6th. It's here. Wake up. So now, and you see how Congress is responding to it. Let me just make this point a little bit stronger, and then I'm gonna let it go. How can you have over 10,000 people demonstrating in the streets trying to overthrow the government, and they walk away from the demonstration They go home. What the hell is that? Did you see that shit? They were trying to overthrow the government. They had the senators and the Congress people hiding in rooms and shit, barricaded off, shelter in place, they call it, you know. And they killed people, and they broke into the Capitol, and then they went home. You know, they went to hell home, and a lot of them are still home. You know, they ain't been arrested yet. You know, so you know what it looks like. And then you got members in the Congress right after this year happened, standing up in the Congress saying that was okay, what they did. You know, in fact, some of them might have even let them in. Now, this is what we, the people, are confronted with. So we have to unite everybody that we can possibly unite in a fight against this. This is the real challenge of a united front right here, staring us right in the face. And it's a challenge that we have to meet, because if we don't meet it, we're dead. Because if they take power, they coming to get us first. We're already on the list, you know. And these people are not just some fanatics and some extremists outside the government. They are in the government. Trump was the president, you know, so they are in the government. So the challenge is real, and it's now. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, what I add is myself, we had another comrade, Josh Parks. We did when we were living in DC, we did a protest at the Capitol at a Jeff Sessions confirmation hearing. And all we just stood up and yelled, you know. We were immediately apprehended by like 4 of them. You know, subsequently zip tied and put in the Capitol, you know, jail or whatever. With a lot of other folks, it was, you know, it was a protest day. Yet that jail was as empty. I'm sure the day of the insurrection, that was an empty jail. You could lick the floors.
Well, what do you think about being charged with trespass?
Yeah,
you can try to overthrow the government, and you're gonna get charged with trespassing.
What was the charge? It was trespassing, and I was literally banned from Congress for 3 months. Yet, you know, white supremacists can bring.
I'm cutting myself off.
Yeah, I'm not going into that. But no, I think you make a great point. Yeah, part of your point had me laughing. They just walked away, like, you know, not a scratch on them. I actually saw a video of a police officer asking them nicely to leave the Senate headquarters. They're like, "Hey, can you please leave? This is a nice sacred place. Please leave." It's ridiculous, but you know, we got to build that united front. You know, they came for the Capitol. I mean, they'll come for us. You know, and we got to keep growing and keep building. Did anybody have anything else they wanted to add? Carlos?
Yeah, sure. No, United Front. I mean, I saw it out in the street, like I said earlier, with young whites, Chicanos, Asians, and Black working together. The '92 rebellion was primarily Latino and Black, poor people, unorganized, right? So we have to build that united front, you know, against racism, against fascism. I agree with everything that Frank is saying. You know, we got those folks, you know, yeah. I mean, what can I say? The Black movement, together with the Chicano movement and working class movement, the strategy for social change and revolution in the United States, we got to build on that. And with Black leadership, you know, and put out that, you know, we'll only be free, you know, when Black people are free. You know, if Black people are free, well, then we'll all be free. But that united front is key. I think we got the foundation, the basis for it. Like Frank said, we just got to build on it, make sure there's no divisions, you know, and be ready for that repression. We always get repressed and attacked. We haven't even talked about what MLK suffered by the FBI. You know, we've all been spied on or attacked or raided by the FBI. So thank you. It was an awesome program. Thank you for inviting me, Joel. being on it. Yeah.
Thank you, Carlos. Aislinn, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I think so. I mean, I think Carlos and Frank said it all. And so, you know, our task is to amass organization. We had, as Frank talks about, we had rebellion, we had spontaneous rebellion, over 26 million people. We now need organized resistance. So that's our next task.
100%. And I think one of the biggest difference, I remember talking to Frank about it. One of the biggest difference, I guess, between rebellions now and rebellions back then is, what is it? You called it, Frank, the conscientious involvement of socialists, of people like us, of people, of organizers really trying to, you know,
conscious intervention.
Steer this energy. It was a word that I'm not educated enough to repeat more than once or twice, but the conscientious intervening of folks like ourselves, folks on this call and folks watching this who are active in the streets. And that's the biggest draw we wanted folks to get out of this. We talked about Dr. King's legacy. We talked about the rebellion last year. We talked about a lot of talking, you know, and, you know, after this, you know, next week, you know, we're going to be organizing practically, and that's what we need everybody else to do. You know, we need folks to get out there in the streets, engaging people. I mean, that's the way that we can really build a movement that can achieve Black liberation, socialism, and freedom in our lifetime. So I'd like to thank everybody for hopping on and everybody for watching this live stream. We want to have some more in the future. Really happy with the folks in the comment section who commented. Really appreciate y'all and really appreciate everybody. Everybody who talked, all the awesome words. And with that being said, thank y'all for hopping on, and, you know, freedom in our lifetime and Black liberation now. Talk to everybody later.
All right. Thank you. Bye.